You are going to die without ever meeting yourself. Not because life is short, because you chose distraction over truth every single time the real question surfaced, and then buried it before it could cost you anything. The question was always there. It surfaced at 3 in the morning, when the mind went quiet, and something you could not name rose to the surface. It surfaced in the inexplicable grief that arrived without obvious cause. It surfaced in the moment you watched someone else live with a freedom you could not define, but immediately recognized as something you do not have. You felt it. You always felt it. And then you looked away. That looking away is your entire life. Most men do not avoid self-knowledge because they are lazy or weak. They avoid it because they sense, correctly, that genuine self-examination would destabilize everything they have built. The career, the identity, the carefully maintained image of a man who has it together. The performance that has been running so long, it no longer feels like a performance. To look directly at that would require admitting that most of it was constructed, not chosen. And that admission is one most men will not survive. Carl Jung spent his life mapping what happens to the unlived life, the accumulated weight of everything a man suppressed, abandoned, or sacrificed in the process of becoming socially acceptable. He called it the shadow, not the dramatic darkness of evil or violence, the ordinary darkness of suppressed desire, unexpressed truth, unlived potential, the version of you that was too inconvenient, too threatening, too raw to be permitted into the performance. That version does not disappear. It goes underground, and from underground, it runs everything. It runs your reactions before your mind has time to edit them. It runs your choices at the precise moments you believe you are choosing freely. It runs your relationships, creating the same dynamics with different people, as if the cast keeps changing, but the script never does. The shadow does not need your permission to operate. It has been operating without it for years. Nietzsche diagnosed this with the precision of a man who had looked directly at the human condition and refused to look away. He wrote about the danger of living a life shaped entirely by the expectations of the herd, the accumulated pressure of social norms, inherited values, and the relentless demand to be a recognizable type rather than an actual self. Most men, Nietzsche observed, never become who they are. They become who it is safe to be, and they call that identity. The difference between those two things is a lifetime. The man who becomes who it is safe to be never confronts the question of who he actually is. He is too busy maintaining the approved version to interrogate it. He has opinions, borrowed from the culture around him. He has values, inherited before he was capable of choosing. He has a personality, assembled from the survival requirements of his specific childhood, and never examined since. He does not know where the performance ends and the self begins. He has forgotten there was ever a distinction. Marcus Aurelius returned to this question relentlessly in his private writing, not in public proclamations, in private, in the writing that was never intended for any audience. He wrote about the temptation of distraction, the ease of losing years to the management of appearances rather than the examination of the self. He was the most powerful man in the known world at the time of that writing, and he understood that external power means nothing. Nothing, if a man does not know who is wielding it. You do not know who is wielding yours. The decisions you believe are yours. They are not all yours. Some of them belong to a frightened child who decided, decades ago, that certain things were dangerous and certain things were safe. Some of them belong to the person your parents needed you to be. Some of them belong to the version of yourself you constructed at 15 to survive a social environment that no longer exists. You are carrying all of them. You have been carrying all of them. And you have been calling the weight your personality. Schopenhauer saw the mechanism beneath all of this with devastating clarity. He understood that most men are not directing their lives. They are being driven by unconscious forces they have never examined and could not name if asked. The will. The blind, relentless, pre-rational drive that pushes men forward without ever pausing to ask where they are going or why. Most men experience this as motivation, as ambition, as purpose. Schopenhauer identified it as something closer to compulsion, movement without direction, urgency without meaning. The man driven by unconscious will is not free. He feels free. The absence of visible chains creates the convincing sensation of liberty. But he is being lived. He is not living. Consider the shape of your actual life, not the story you tell about it, but the shape of it, the recurring patterns, the relationships that follow the same arc regardless of who is in them, the opportunities approached and then quietly undermined at the precise moment they became real. The version of yourself you present in situations where you feel watched versus the version that surfaces in genuine solitude. The gap between those two versions is not small. For most men, it is the size of an entire unlived existence. That gap has a name. Jung called it the distance between the persona and the self. The persona is the face you constructed to function in the world, not fraudulent, necessary. It allowed you to navigate social reality, to be legible to others, to survive the specific conditions of your upbringing. But the persona was always meant to be a tool, not a tomb. The problem is not that you built one. The problem is that you have been living inside it so long that you can no longer locate the self it was built to protect. That self is still there, buried, silent, watching. It has been watching every compromise, every suppression, every moment you performed the acceptable version rather than expressed the actual one. It does not speak loudly. It does not announce itself. It surfaces as a persistent low-frequency sense that something essential is missing, without being able to name what. It surfaces as the dreams that disturb you enough to dismiss without examination. It surfaces as the rage that arrives disproportionate to the situation, because the situation is not what the rage is actually about. You have been explaining these signals away your entire life. Machiavelli's understanding of self-deception was precise and unsparing. He knew that the man who cannot see himself clearly cannot navigate anything clearly. Every miscalculation, every repeated failure, every pattern that confuses you with its persistence. These are not accidents. They are the inevitable consequence of operating from a false map. The man who does not know himself is navigating with a map that was drawn by someone else, for a territory that no longer exists, toward a destination he never consciously chose. He is lost. He just does not know it yet. The unlived life does not announce itself as tragedy. That is what makes it so effective as a trap. It announces itself as busyness, as responsibility, as the reasonable decision to prioritize stability over honesty. It looks like a life. It has the correct shape, job, relationships, opinions, routines. From the outside, and from most angles on the inside, it is indistinguishable from an actual life. The difference is only visible in the quiet moments, in the moments between the maintenance and the performance, when the mind is too tired to keep the construction running. In those moments, something surfaces, and the speed with which most men return to distraction tells you everything you need to know about what they found there. You know what you found there. Jung's individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are, was never described as a destination. It was described as a confrontation, not a journey with a comfortable endpoint, a sustained, daily, often brutal confrontation with the gap between who you perform and who you actually are. With the parts of yourself you abandoned because they were inconvenient, with the desires you buried because they threatened the construction, with the shadow that has been running your life from underground while you maintained the acceptable face above. Most men will not begin this confrontation, not because they are incapable, because the confrontation requires something the construction was specifically designed to prevent: the willingness to not know, to sit with the discomfort of an identity that is not yet reformed into something recognizable, to release the grip on the persona long enough to ask what actually remains when it falls away. That uncertainty is intolerable to a man who has spent his entire life managing certainty, and so he maintains the construction. He tightens the grip. He adds more performance to cover the cracks. And the years pass, and the question, the only question that ever actually mattered, remains unanswered. Not because the answer was unavailable, because the asking was always postponed. There was always a better time, a quieter moment, a version of himself that felt more prepared for the confrontation, and the postponement continued, and the construction held, and the life passed. Most men die as the person they were told to be, not the person they were, the person they performed, for so long and with such consistency that the distinction was lost, not violently, not dramatically, just gradually, in the accumulation of small avoidances, in the daily decision to maintain rather than examine, in the life that looked from the outside like it was being lived. You are going to die. The only question that has ever mattered is whether you will have met yourself before that happens. Most men already know the answer.